Hi, it's Saturday, January 11th, 2025. Welcome to the new year. This is my first video for the new year, and it's because I've been really involved in a project that I haven't spent much time doing computer stuff. So the layout that I'm presenting to you now was originally built by a private individual as far as the buildings go. Then that private individual decided to get away from the hobby because of his age and to downsize, and so he sold the buildings and his original layout to a local person out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Then that person was involved in the flood of 2008 in Cedar Rapids, which was quite a dramatic and damaging flood. And the buildings of the layout survived on the second story of his house, where the lower level was completely underwater. So the buildings missed being completely consumed by the Cedar River by about 4 feet, I would guess. So, of course, because his house was so damaged, the purchaser of the layout decided that he was going to also sell. And so the layout was acquired by a third person who happened to be the cousin of the original builder. That person set up the layout for a short time and discovered that it was just really not his forte. He was really not a model railroader. He enjoyed the buildings and wanted to keep them for the legacy of his cousin, but instead decided to give them as a donation to the Cedar Rapids History Center. So I was commissioned by the Cedar Rapids History Center several years ago, 12 years ago, 10 years ago, to build an exhibit based on downtown Cedar Rapids in the 1950s. And so we took some of the original structures and that which represent downtown Cedar Rapids. And what I'll do in a little bit is I'm going to go through a book and show you photos of the real structures and then what has been mimicked in the model. So the original part of the layout was essentially kind of this, and then we've added Union Station and a couple of other buildings, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So the Cedar Rapids History Center, about 7 or 8 years ago, decided to change their location to something that was more of a historic building, and at that time they didn't have room for the model railroad, which at that point was about 15 by 24, but really the main part of the layout was about 3 foot by 24 foot. And so I disassembled and removed all the buildings, packed them carefully for movement, and then cut apart the base with the eventual hope that they would set it back up in their newest location. Well, that has really never come to be, but over the years I've been trying for many years to try to find a home for all of these really nicely done structures of downtown Cedar Rapids, Iowa in the 1950s. So amazingly, approximately around Thanksgiving time, there was an ad in the local Facebook marketplace that a customer had purchased a Lionel layout that was looking for someone to help him professionally reassemble it. So I appeared and said, well, can help you to do that. And as I got looking closer to the Lionel layout that he had purchased, it really was not something that was going to be very reliable for a lobby installation. So during the course of the conversation, one of the things my customer said was, gosh, I really wish I had something that was really based more about Cedar Rapids. And a light went off in my head and said, oh my gosh, I know just the layout. So for the past 8 weeks or so, we've been working with the Cedar Rapids History Center and basically are trying to have the exhibit decommissioned by the History Center, and we've been able to get most of the way in accomplishing that, which means that the structures and so on are now owned by my customer, and we are basically using them on a basis of and have some paperwork that says if my customer ever decides to abolish his use of the layout for his business lobby, then the History Center gets first right of refusal to receive the buildings back. We've also agreed to not only preserve and maintain the integrity of the original concept of the layout, but we're also going to add to it. So let me back up and basically sort of introduce what we have going on here. This is a large lobby for a company that does a lot of storage, among many things, salvages and so on, but he has an amazing lobby here for all of his office space and so on. And so the layout will be utilized in a space that sort of almost feels like a railroad station. So with that, let me pick out some images of some of the locations on the layout so you'll better see what we're attempting to do. So working from geographically north to south, on the model railroad. This is the Quaker Oats Company. It's the largest cereal mill in the United States, actually maybe the largest in the world. Quaker Oats produces, of course, the famous Quaker Oats. They make oatmeal. They make a lot of the different cereals, peanut butter crunch, some of those kinds of things. But that factory is still in full production today. It looks pretty much similar. I was not able to locate in my references immediately with me a location of this building as it looks today, but this is one of the first structures. This structure is the Chicago Northwestern Freight Station, and behind it is the Hotel Pullman, which was a famous old hotel in the Cedar Rapids area, and behind that was the Roosevelt Hotel, which is still kind of standing, but the Roosevelt was sort of the hotel that everybody who came to town via train and entertained in our theaters and so on would stay. It's no longer used as a conventional hotel, but instead more of a long-term retirement type community. This is a real photo of the Allison Hotel, which had been recreated in a modeling area, a modeling standpoint, I should say. And here's, again, sort of a contrast between the two of them. This is the Magnus Hotel, which was along the corridor of the 4th Street tracks, which ran through Cedar Rapids, and hosted all the passenger trains from the Union Pacific via the Chicago Northwestern. Of course, it had Illinois Central trains that were on their way to their freight stations, and then they had the Rock Island main line from Manly down to basically to the south towards southern Iowa and eventually on towards St. Louis area. And so between that and the Milwaukee Road, which had their line between Marion, Iowa, and Ottumwa, the corridor hosted 50 scheduled passenger trains a day, plus other freights that went through. If you look at this photo by William S. Kuba, Bill was a local rail fan who just passed away a few years ago, but it's sort of the same feeling we're going to get here as the trains come down the corridor and then pass through all the downtown structures. We're now at 3rd Avenue and the 4th Street tracks in Cedar Rapids, and you'll see the little State Theater, which later became the World Theater in Cedar Rapids, and then the Guarantee Bank building is behind. Both of these structures still stand, although the State Theater is no longer a theater. It's been basically demolished on the interior, and they hope it'd be used for something in the future, but probably not as its original theater building. And then over here is the Cedar Rapids Union Station. Union Station, Cedar Rapids hosted passenger trains from the Rock Island and the Chicago Northwestern, and it stayed in service until the Union Pacific moved their trains to the Milwaukee Road, which sent the trains from downtown Cedar Rapids to Marion, Iowa, which is basically an adjoining community, but it really cut back on the amount of scheduled passenger trains through downtown. The Zephyr Rocket was the remaining train on the Rock Island, and it eventually stopped calling at the station, and instead the Rock Island had a small station up towards their north yard, which was about a mile north of this location, and that then made Union Station no longer necessary. Union Station was constructed in 1897, and it covered basically 2 city blocks from 3rd to 5th Avenue. In its heyday, like I mentioned earlier, there were well over 50 scheduled passenger trains a day. It overlooked what we called Green Square Park. And then in 1961, the city of Cedar Rapids decided that instead of having an abandoned train station, they needed a parking lot worse or a parking ramp, and so the station was demolished in 61. The last building we'll talk about is the Cherry Burrell building. The Cherry building is still in place, although there's not any more manufacturing there, but it was built in about 1880 or so, became Cherry Burrell in about 1928, and they were a producer of dairy equipment. So the layout itself will basically be a roundy round. So the trains, because of its original location, the track actually has to go through the building to turn around, and that was the way the building was intentionally constructed. But as you can see, the main lines are just going to make a double track loop where we will feature a Northwestern passenger train and a Rock Island freight train. And then on this side, the Illinois Central here and the Milwaukee Road, where they came into the corridor, and the Rock Island here. We're going to feature an Illinois Central train that will, a Milwaukee train that'll just shuttle back and forth as though they're switching cars. And then there'll be a Rock Island train that will be a switch engine that'll also just shuttle back and forth to make lots of action on the 4th Street corridor. This is the bridge over the Cedar River, and again, this creates then the continuous loop. If you're interested in learning more about the Cedar Rapids history, and particularly contrasting the what I would call now and then, if you do a search on YouTube and type in Cedar Rapids Railroad now and then, I did a presentation for the Iowa chapter of the National Railway Historical Society on contrasting Cedar Rapids railroads now and then. So look for that. It's a really good program. It takes about an hour, but lots of photographs of vintage shots of a lot of the buildings and things we've just talked about, and contrasting that, of course, what it looks like today. So thanks for watching, and look forward to updates on this layout and many things to come over the next few weeks as I start hitting the road after the holidays. Thanks again.